for Chapter 2 is using the model that we just went through, the production possibility curve, and using it to see or to illustrate principle number 5, which was gains from trade. There are gains from trade. The idea of gains from trade is that people are better off when they can buy and sell from other people. Right? So rather than just living all by yourself and having to grow your own food and make your own clothing and build your own house, rather than doing that, you get to buy and sell goods and services from other people. And in order to do that, you get a job. So you have to specialize, you produce something that you're good at doing or that you like doing, you make money, and then you get to buy your food, buy your car, whatever it is that you want to buy. So you don't have to make it for yourself. That makes you better off because you get to buy stuff that you wouldn't ever be able to make for yourself, like, say, a phone and a computer. But then it also makes the people who produce the phones and the computers better off because they will make money. All right, so we're going to go through a very simple example then to illustrate how people are better off when they focus on specializing, so just focus on producing one particular thing and then trading for other things. Good. Okay, so gains from trade occur when people specialize and trade. And can thereby consume more than they could produce. So that's what buying and selling does. It allows us to have stuff that we would never be able to make for ourselves and to have way more stuff than we would ever be able to make for ourselves. Okay, now, so the way economies work then is people specialize in trade. So then the question is, who should specialize in what? Well, obviously you should be good at it, right? You should do something that you're good at. But what does that mean? If you're good at something, it means that you are like faster, you're more productive compared to other people. So if you're more productive at producing the good than other people, more productive is the same as having a lower cost than other people, right? So it takes you less time, for example, or you can use the resources in a way that you're using less material, or you don't have to use as much machinery, whatever. Something about you makes you good at it so that you're more productive, and when you're more productive, you have a lower cost. That is called a comparative advantage. So you have an advantage compared to everybody else because you can produce the good at a lower cost or a lower opportunity cost. So this will make the economy efficient then, if we have all the producers who have the lowest cost for production. Those are the ones who are producing the goods. And overall production will be as low a cost as possible. Okay, so when someone can produce a good with a lower opportunity cost than other people. So for example, with teachers, okay, so I teach economics, other people teach, say, French. Now, I could teach French, but it would take me long time to prepare for class because I'm not good at French at all and I've forgotten it all. And so, I mean, I could, but it would take me forever. Other people could, like the French teachers, they could teach economics, right? But again, it would take them probably a long time to prepare because everybody's got different skills, right? So I'm okay at math and I'm pretty good at interpreting graphs and so on. So I became an economics teacher. Other people who are better at languages and like listening skills and all those things that are required for French, those people should teach French because they will be able to do it faster or with a lower cost than me. All right, now, the second type of advantage that a person can have is simply being able to produce more compared to somebody else. And it's not quite the same thing. Okay, so that's called an absolute advantage. When someone can produce more output with a given amount of input. So it's not just about how fast you are. Okay, so it's not just about how much you can produce and how fast you are. It's also about what are you giving up. Okay, so that's what comparative advantage includes. What's the value of what you're giving up? So what's your opportunity cost? Just being faster does not mean that you should be the one producing that good, because you might have a very high opportunity cost. Right? So, for example, I could maybe get a job at Starbucks, and maybe I would be super fast at making coffees. Maybe I'd be the fastest person in that Starbucks and be able to make lots and lots of coffee super fast. Does that mean I should get a job at Starbucks? No, because I'd be giving up a job like this, which I like a lot better. Okay, so it's also about what you're giving up, not just about how fast you are. Okay, so another example would be, say, you become a lawyer, but you're also really fast at washing dishes. So should you get a job washing dishes? No, of course not. Somebody else who's a little slower maybe should get the job washing dishes, and you should just be a lawyer because that would be more efficient, because your cost would be way too high to wash dishes. Okay. Okay, so absolute advantage is not really what's important. What's important is what are you giving up? What are you giving up? Okay, so we're going to go through this example with two farmers who grow apples and peaches. And here we're given the information about their production possibilities. Okay, so using all resources, Ron can produce 50 kilo of apples or 50 kilo of peaches. Okay, so that's a simple PPF, production possibility frontier. Skipping down to this one, using all resources, we've got Ted. He can produce 45 kilo of apples or 15 kilo of peaches. Okay, now, switch over here. Okay, so now we have the graphs. In a second, there we go. Okay. All right, so let's draw the graphs. So just using the first bullet point here for Ron, and then using the third one here for Ted. Good. Okay, so Ron. Okay, so these will be production possibility frontiers that are straight lines. Now, why do we have a straight line after I have blabbed about bowed out curves for so long? Just makes the calculations easier, that's why. So when you're doing calculations with PPFs, often it will be with a straight line, just to make it a bit easier. That's supposed to be a straight line. It's my ruler. There we go. Okay, and then Ted, 45 for apples, 15 for peaches. so those are the PPFs. And what we can see is that Ron has an absolute advantage because he can produce more of either fruit. But that will not be important. What's going to be important is the cost of the production, which will be measured by like how many of one fruit they give up to produce more of the other fruit, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Okay, but now we'll go back here. What we're told is what the farmer chooses to produce and consume. So the production possibility frontier, remember, just tells us what the choices are. It doesn't tell us what to choose. That depends on how much the farmer likes peaches compared to how much they like apples. So that's just going to be given. Okay, so Ron likes them pretty much equally, I guess. So he is in the middle here. He's going to produce and consume 25 and 25. And Ted chooses to produce and consume 15 for apples. Oops. 15 and 10. 10 for peaches. Good. Okay, so now in the example, these guys, right now they're not trading. They're just each producing some of each fruit for themselves. They're just consuming what they produce for themselves, all by themselves. But now they're going to trade. They're going to specialize in trade. So that means one of them will produce peaches and one of them will produce apples, and then they will trade with each other. But we have to figure out who should produce peaches and who should produce apples. And it will be whoever has a lower cost, and the cost is given by the slope of the curve. Okay, so when we did examples with a bowed out curve like that, we had a slope that was different at each point. And so that's why we're not going to do that here. We just want to calculate one slope or one opportunity cost. All right, so for Ron, what's the slope? 1. That's right, slope is 1. 50 over 50, or 1 peach per apple. And if we take the reciprocal, so this right now, this would be the opportunity cost of apples. How many peaches are given up for a unit of apples? So 1. And if we take the reciprocal so that we get how many apples are given up per unit of peaches, what would we get? 1. Same? Okay. Now for Ted, what is Ted's slope? 15 over 45. So a third, or you could put 0.33 or a third of a unit of peach per unit of apples. So if he wants to produce one more unit of apples, he gives up a third of a unit of peaches. But what about the other way around? If he wants to produce another unit of peaches, how many apples would he give up? 3. Yeah, so the reciprocal, 3. All right. So what we have here then are the opportunity costs. So first one is the opportunity cost of apples. How many peaches are given up for a unit of apples? 1 or a third? Which one's lower? This one here. So what that means is by comparing these two costs for apples, we can see that Ted has a lower opportunity cost for apples. Okay, so I'll circle that one. Now, the next set here of numbers is the opportunity cost of peaches, because it's how many apples are given up for a unit of peaches. 1 unit of apples or 3 units. Which one is lower? This one here. Okay, so I'll circle this one here. All right, so that is how we would establish who should do what, by calculating the slope, which is the opportunity cost, and then seeing who has a lower opportunity cost. Okay, so for apples, Ted has the lower cost, and then for peaches, Ron has the lower cost. Good. Okay, so now we can fill in the notes on the next page. All right. So filling in the notes, Ron has to give up 1 kilo of peaches to get 1 kilo of apples, or 1 kilo of apples to get 1 kilo of peaches. For Ted, he gave up 1/3 a kilo of peaches to get 1 kilo of apples, or reciprocal 3 kilo of apples to get 1 kilo of peaches. So for apples then, we would compare the cost of 1 to the cost of 1/3. This one is lower, so Ted has the lower cost or the comparative advantage for apples. And then for peaches, we would compare 1 to 3, and 1 is obviously lower, so that's for Ron. So he has a lower cost or a comparative advantage for peaches. All right. Okay, so now they're going to specialize in trade. And if Ron specializes in peaches, so that means he will grow no apples, he will just grow peaches. How many kilo of peaches can Ron make? 50. Good. Ted is not going to produce peaches, only producing apples. How many can he make? 45. Good. Okay. All right. Okay, so Ron will produce 50 kilo of peaches, 0 apples. And Ted, 0 peaches, 45 apples. Okay, so that is specializing. So the example is to go through specialization in trade. So they've specialized, now they're going to trade. Now in this example, they're going to just barter with each other. Obviously in real life we use money. We buy and sell with money. But in this example they will just barter with each other. Now how much will they trade for how much? They're just going to talk to each other and come up with an agreement, which is called the terms of trade. So this is not something that you can calculate. This is just that Ron and Ted will talk to each other and come up with an agreement that they're happy with. Okay, so this is just given. All right, so this is what they're going to trade. Okay, so now we're going to organize everything into this table. The first thing in the table is before trade, and these numbers here are the numbers from here. So this is what we were given at the beginning of the example. So Ron, 25 and 25, that's this point here. Ted, 10 and 15. So that's where these numbers are coming from here. So this was before trade. Now the production and the consumption numbers are the same because without trade, that meant they were just eating what they had produced for themselves. So what they ate was what they produced. So those numbers are the same. Now, after trade, okay, so Ron, apples, he's not producing them. Ron, peaches, he's producing 50 kilos. Ted, apples, he's producing 45. Ted, peaches, not producing. There. Okay, so specialization. Now for consumption. So the consumption, to figure out these numbers, now we need to look at the terms of trade. What did they trade for what? All right, so we'll start with we'll start with Ron. Okay, so they trade 27 kilo of apples for 20 kilo of peaches. Okay, so we'll start with Ron. So he produced 50 kilo of peaches, and he's going to give Ted 20. So Ted peaches, I'll draw an arrow. Ted peaches will get 20. How much does Ron have left? 30. Okay, so Ron produced 50. He's giving Ted 20, which leaves him with 30, in exchange for the apples. So now Ted has produced 45 kilo of apples. He's going to give 27 to Ron. So Ron apples, he gets to consume 27. So out of the 45 here, Ted gives Ron 27. How much does he have left for himself? $45 minus 27. 45 minus 27. 18. All right. So I'll just go over that again. Okay. They have specialized. So Ron is producing peaches because he's got the lower opportunity cost for peaches. He gives Ted 20, which leaves him with 30. In exchange, Ted, who's producing the apples, because he's got the lower opportunity cost for producing apples, he gives Ron 27, and then 45 minus 27 leaves Ted with 18. Last thing, gains from trade. What we're doing here is we're comparing these two columns, the two consumption columns. How much more do they get? So Ron apples, 25, 27. So he's got 2 more. Ron peaches, 25 to 30. He's got 5 more. Ted apples, 15 to 18 is 3 more. And Ted peaches, 10 to 20 is 10 more. All right, so what's the gain from trade? They get more stuff. Right? That's the whole point of having an economy and buying and selling from other people. We get to have more stuff. We get to consume more things, better things. We get to have a better lifestyle than if we just were at home trying to build a house for ourselves. All right, any questions? Okay, so last thing that we'll do is on the next page, we're going to use these numbers that we've calculated in the table and update our graph. There we go. Okay, so in your graph, in your notes, you've got the these 2 points. These 2 points were where they were before trade. So for both of these, we're going to label them before trade. And they were production and consumption points. All right, and now after trade. So now the after trade production and consumption numbers are different points on the graph. Okay, so we'll start with the production points. So for Ron, he's producing here, right, 50 peaches. So I'll label that after trade production. And Ted is down here. He's producing 45 kilo of apples. And then last thing is the consumption points. Okay, so Ron, 27 for apples and 30 for peaches. So I'll put after trade consumption. And then Ted, 18 and 20. Good. All right. So a couple things about the graph then. They are not, it's not possible for them to produce any more than before. They're still within their individual production possibility frontier. So they don't have more resources, they don't have better technology, their production possibilities have not increased. But now they are able to consume more than they would be able to produce, right? These points are outside of their PPFs. They would not be able to produce these points, right? But they can consume them simply because the production is now more efficient because the producers with the lower cost are the ones who are producing the goods. So that's what makes economies, market economies, more efficient, because market economies give people opportunities to gain from trade, and people take advantage of opportunities. If someone's got a lower cost to produce the good than somebody else, they will produce the good. And it makes us all better off because then we get to have more stuff when we're producing more efficiently. Okay, so they can't produce it more than they could, but they now can consume more than they could before. Okay, even though at the beginning we pointed out that Ron is actually better at both production because he could produce more of both fruits compared to Ted. That doesn't mean that he won't benefit from trade. He will still benefit from trade because Ted still has a lower opportunity cost for apples compared to Ron did. So Ron will still benefit from trading. So even though Ron has an absolute advantage, Ted still has a comparative advantage for apples, so they should still trade. All right. There we go. Okay. So comparative, not absolute advantage, is the basis for gains from trade. And then the last note, what I was just talking about, specialization and trade allow for consumption, but not production outside the PPF. Exercise 1. Canada and the United States are producing apples and oranges, and we have their production possibilities here. So these production possibilities, if you graph them out, they would be a straight line. So in other words, the changes are just constant, right? So apples, Canada, for example, at each point there's an increase of 425 and a decrease of 200 oranges. So it's constant, so they would be straight lines. Okay, so first questions are about opportunity costs. So for Canada, the opportunity cost per apple. Okay, so what we want to do is calculate the change in the number of oranges relative to the change in the number of apples. Okay, so if they want
to get more apples, they have to give up some oranges. So you could calculate the changes either between 2 points, like between A and B, or just between A, the top, and G, the bottom, and you'll get the same answer. Okay, so we'll do it that way. So the opportunity cost is, for apples, is the oranges, so 1,200. So 1,200 oranges. And then we want to divide that by what they would get, which is going to point G, 2,550 for apples. Okay, and that will work out to about 0.47 oranges per apple. Okay, the opportunity cost per orange for Canada, so now it's just the reciprocal. So if they go from point G to point A, they would give up 2,550 apples and get 1,200 oranges. And so that works out to 2.125, and that would be apples per orange. All right, now for the US, the opportunity cost per apple. So again, we'll go between point A and G. So per apple, they would have to give up 1,800 oranges. And they would get 2,400 apples. And that works out to 0.75 oranges per apple. All right, and now the reciprocal. So opportunity cost per orange, going from G to A, then they would give up 2,400 apples and get 1,800 oranges. And that works out to 1 1/3, so 1.33 apples per orange. Okay, so now what we need to determine is who has a comparative advantage in apples. So that means who has the lower cost per apple. Okay, so Canada has a cost of 0.47 orange per apple, and the US has a cost of 0.75 orange per apple. All right, so Canada's cost of 0.47 is lower, so that means Canada has a comparative advantage in apples. Which country has a comparative advantage in oranges? So now Canada has a cost of 2.125 apples per orange, and that is larger compared to the United States. So the United States has a lower opportunity cost for oranges. All right, next question. Suppose both countries are currently producing bundle D, and then they decide to specialize in trade. Okay, so before trade, they're at bundle D. All right, so that's right here for Canada. So they're producing that combination of apples and oranges, and the US is here. Okay, and then they're going to trade, but let's fill these numbers in the table first. Okay, so we're filling in the numbers for before trade, so that's bundle D for both countries. Okay, now production and consumption will be the same number because before trade, the countries are only able to consume what they have produced for themselves. Okay, and then the United States, bundle D, 1,200 for the apples and 900 for the oranges. Good. Okay, So then they decide to specialize in trade, and that will be based on their comparative advantage. So going back here, we've already figured out that Canada has a comparative advantage in apples. So that means they're going to start to only produce apples. Now, how many apples can they produce if they only produce apples? That will be here, bundle G. Only apples means they can produce 2550. And they will produce no oranges. Then the United States has a comparative advantage in oranges. All right, so they are going to produce no apples. How many oranges can they produce? So that will be bundle A. Bundle A is 0 apples and 1,800 oranges. Okay, so now they will trade. Now the terms of trade are 1,250 apples for 700 oranges. Okay, so we'll start with the apples. Now Canada has produced 2,550 and they're going to trade 1,250. Okay, so the United States will get 1,250 apples, and how much will Canada have left? So we need to take 2,550 minus 1,250. So the amount that Canada has left will be 1,300. In exchange, the United States is going to give Canada 700 oranges. Okay, so Canada gets 700 oranges. How much does the US have left? So they produced 1,800. We subtract the 700 they gave to Canada, and so that will leave them with 1,100. Good. Okay, and then last column is gains from trade. And so this is the difference between consumption before trade and consumption after trade. All right, so for Canada, apples consumption has increased from 1,275 to 1,300. So that's an increase of 25. Oranges, 600 to 700. That's an increase of 100. United States apples, 1,200 and now 1,250. So that's an increase of 50. And United States oranges, 900 to 1,100. That's an increase of 200. Good. Okay, so everybody is better off now that they're able to trade. Okay, now the next 2 pages we can actually skip. Okay, so I'm just going to skip over these next 2 pages because it's just not important. We're not going to test you on that material. All right, so last page then is about economic analysis. So just a little bit about what economists do. So as an economist, you could get a job, for example, for a bank or for a government, and you would be doing different kinds of work. If you work for a bank, for example, probably you're going to be analyzing the economy, making predictions about what you think might happen in the future, and measuring what is happening right now. If you work for the government, you could be doing some similar things, but also working on policy. So governments work on policy, and what that means is recommendations about what the government should do to help the economy. Okay, so we have 2 types of analysis. So the first one is called positive economics. This describes how the economy actually works based on facts and data. Okay, so for example, a higher sales tax will decrease the number of new cars sold. So that is something that you can measure. So you can gather data on this, right? You would be measuring the change in the number of cars sold. And you could figure out how the sales tax changed that quantity. Okay, so positive statements are either right or wrong. So you use data to prove whether the statement is right or wrong. Normative economics is more about your opinion as an economist about what should happen, what should be done. So normative economics prescribes how the economy should work. So for example, the government should tax firms that pollute. Okay, so the word should will almost always mean that it is an opinion. It's a normative statement. And it's an opinion because there's nothing to measure here. If the statement said a tax on pollution causes firms to decrease pollution, that would be a positive statement because you could measure those changes. But here there's nothing to measure. It's just a statement about what you think should be done, and people can agree or disagree. Good. Okay, so here we have some examples. Prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money. Okay, so this is talking about inflation, which is something that you can measure. So that would be positive. The government should print less money. So again, the word should will almost always give it away, that it is normative. And there's nothing to measure here, right? There's nothing being measured. Tax cut is needed to stimulate the economy. Okay, now this one is going to be normative because of the way it's worded. The tax cut is needed. Now that's an opinion. Maybe it's not needed, or maybe something else is needed. If it said something else, like the tax cut did stimulate the economy, then that would be positive because you could measure GDP before and after and prove whether that was right or wrong. But here it just says the tax cut is needed, so that will be normative. Okay, and last one, an increase in the price of burritos. So that's a wrap, or kind of like a sandwich, a round sandwich. It will cause an increase in consumer demand for shoes. Now this is obviously not true because that's just silly, but this is measurable, right? Demand is measurable. You can measure the quantity of shoes sold before and after, and so that will make this a positive statement. Great. Okay, that's the end of chapter 2.